we've been talking about the second book, Sadhana Pada, and 2 weeks ago we left off concluding a discussion on the yamas and the niyamas. And in this particular second book of the Yoga Sutras, there's not much remaining after that in terms of actual number of sutras that remain, but the ones that do remain are very significant. And when you read the book and we think of the Yoga Sutras, we think of the Ashtanga Yoga, those 8 limbs. And yes, Patanjali is covering those 8 limbs. But I find it interesting how he has divided the book. And I think it's indicative of, it begs a question, you might say. And if we look at what has been covered of the 8 limbs that we've spoken about in previous weeks, we see that as we conclude, which we will this week, the second book of the Sadhana Pada, we'll see that we have covered 5 of them. And then subsequently, and I believe I mentioned this in the last meetings, we'll then go on to cover the final 3 and then continue with the book. Now it's interesting, he broke it here at 5, and then he's going to go on to and treat the next 3 in a different chapter or a different book. And he's covered yama, niyama, and here today we're going to talk about the next 3, asana, pranayam, and pratyahara. And when I think of these 8, and I've often taught classes on the eightfold, the 8-limb path, Ashtanga Yoga, in my mind, I think it's very natural, we group yama, niyama, the do's and don'ts, or the don'ts and do's, as a foundation for our study of Ashtanga Yoga, because we have to have those as a firm foundation to proceed on. And then the next 3 come. And I think of the next 3 is also a unit. You could say asana, pranayam, and pratyahara form that middle grouping of 3. And then we have the final 3 samyama, which are traditionally known as samyama, dharana, dhyan, and samadhi. And as I said, the first group is the foundation upon which the spiritual path is built. But the next 3 focusing, you could say their focus, and they too go as a group, they focus on harnessing the restless mind in order that we might calm the vrittis. And remember when we started, right at the very beginning, the Yoga Sutras, the neutralization or the calming of the vrittis in order for us to calm that ego identity, the ego consciousness, to be able to then transcend that ego consciousness in higher meditation. Well, these 3 particularly, once we have the foundation in place of proper behavior, what to watch out for, what to do, is, you might say, are the essence of this sadhana pada, the asana, pranayama, and pratyahara, and they allow us now with that foundation to calm those vrittis. And as we know, when the life force and the breath are restless within us, we're identified with the body and with the personality. And these 3 steps are the steps that harness that life force. And you could say all 5 of them do, of course, but these are more particular, you might say. After laying that foundation of yama niyama, Patanjali then comes to asana. Now, asana's, very much characteristic. People, when they think of yoga, they think of asana now in today's world. But let me read here what Swamiji has translated. Asana, the 3rd limb of Ashtanga Yoga, he puts in parentheses, means to be seated in a firm, pleasant, and relaxed position. And that's pretty much the translation of what in the Sanskrit, it's essentially that. And you could say, he goes on, you could say the next one also is related to that. By reducing one's natural tendency toward restlessness, and by visualizing infinity, true posture is acquired. The natural tendency of restlessness. Now that we know that restlessness, tendency toward restlessness of the body, mind, of the breath, and of the life force itself. And we have to be able to reduce that movement. That movement, you could say the waves, those vrittis are an expression of restlessness. And here in asana, the emphasis is on steadiness, ease, or relaxation, you might say. Steadiness and ease, relaxation, resulting in what the word in Sanskrit, resulting in ananta, boundlessness. Ananta means endless or boundless, or you could say, you could extend that to maybe saying infinity, without bounds. And we have to, it's consequently relaxed steadiness. And this is the essence of successful meditation for the beginner. It's, when we sit to meditate, we find that we're restless. We're just always fidgeting and moving. And we have to be able to resist that restlessness, but it can't be a resistance that results in tension or that's motivated by tension, because just to very tensely hold oneself still and not move a muscle, it's pretty hard to do. You can't do it with tension. You have to relax into it. And so much is made when we learn to meditate is to be able to simply relax every muscle in the body. And if you feel a certain tendency to move, a certain restlessness, or to perhaps wiggle or scratch an itch, if you can visualize at those particular points that ananta, or that infinitely, or that endlessness, that boundlessness, infinity of space in that individual spot within the body, of course, then you can forget and release that tension one by one. Now, ultimately, we want to release that tension all over the body. And eventually, of course, we need to go beyond the body. But here we're speaking asana is more directed particularly toward the body. And out of this couple of simple sutras, simple but deep, out of those, the whole system of Hatha Yoga has been developed to take this into a system of exercise that helps us to be able to do that. Not only the physical body, because Hatha Yoga also brings the movement of life force, which is part of pranayama, which we're going to go into in a moment. Bring that whole aspect of body, life force, mental restlessness, all of them, bring them into a simple state of steadiness and ease. And the goal here, and particularly when we're looking on the physical side, the goal here is to proper practice of asana is to forget the body, to be able to, as Yogananda used to say, dump the body, let it go. But of course, it has to be done with all three of all three of these are involved, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, to be able to withdraw the life force away from the body, to be able to really be able to dump that body. But it's an extremely important aspect. And they say that you could say that you've perfected, this is the measure, you could say, have I perfected the ability to sit still? If you can sit still without moving, it's said, for 3 hours, then you could say that you're accomplished in the practice of asana. And that's hard to do, but what you do is and I've found, and now I can't sit 3 hours completely still, but I can sit 5 minutes, which to me was a big accomplishment, even getting started on meditation. I was always moving, there was something moving in me as I was a young man. And it was habit and an outward attraction of my energy out into the world. And I never even was aware I was restless until I tried to stop. And I think the same thing as many of us, we're not aware of our restlessness until we actually try to control it. But the controlling again comes back to relaxation, the necessity to release tension and to be able to release mental tension, to be able to release emotional tension, not bottle it up and suppress it, you might say, to be able to flow into that. And the way to do that really is with this sense of boundlessness, infinity, ananta. Swamiji used to say, and I think Master echoing what Yogananda used to say, is start your meditation tense, very tense, and bring all the tension to a critical point, a high point, then all at once release it, and inhaling, double breath, tensing and releasing that tension with a double exhalation breath. And he then said, doing that a few times, focus on infinity. Look into the spiritual eye and try to feel yourself million miles ahead, million miles behind, up, below, left and right, that you're floating in infinity and feeling that sense of releasing the body, releasing all of our being into that infinity. So, and he goes on to say, he says in number 248 here, in the next one, he says, from this point, the dualities cease to disturb the mind. And this is it, is to the degree that we cannot release, the mind is disturbed. The emotions are disturbed. Everything is disturbed. And so this is, you could say it's a very necessary step. Now, all of the exercises that have been developed around the word asana, these are fine. These are great exercises, but don't leave it there. They're a wonderful step to be able to bring the whole body into a state of being able to forget the body and go beyond the body. But the essence is learning to sit still and just be, but more than physically. It's something else, which brings us to the topic of pranayam. The breath, so long as the breath is restless, we're going to be restless in the body. We're going to be restless in the mind. And this is such a critical part of yoga for deep meditation, for bringing ourselves in controlling of our life force, because the life force is represented by the breath. We can use the breath to control the life force, and vice versa. We use the breath to control life force. We control life force, and we'll be able to control the breath. So with the body stilled by asana, we then calm the flow of life force of the senses within the body. We begin to go beyond the outward physical expression of the body to become aware that this physical body is just a representation of these inner forces, something deeper than the physical. And we look at the world at large and we see this world, there's energy behind physical matter. Matter is just but a representation or a manifestation, condensation of life force. And we begin to see that behind everything physical, there's this movement of energy. And the important thing with pranayama, of course, is using the various exercises that can be done classically with pranayama exercises. But essentially, it's learning to be able to calm and eventually slow down the breath to be able to ultimately transcend the breath. And all of the various exercises of pranayama, they're helping to bring about, just as we do when we're using asana in the physical sense, to bring about a balance, a sense of ease, a sense of harmony and calmness within the flow of that life force. And those things that disturb the life force are, you could say in a yogic sense, our enemy. Now, this is a lot of things in our physical life, everything we do, our environment, the things we take into our body, the thoughts that go through them. All of these things are stimulating. So it's a job. But when it's stilled, we begin to discover that there is a link between that life force and why we want to be able to harmonize and balance this life force movement. And you might say first, become aware of that is because there's a link between that life force and the sense telephones, those inner senses or the outer senses, and there's the inner senses as well, but those outer senses, you could say the mental telephones, they're sending in messages into the switchboard, and one after the other until the poor switchboard operator is totally overwhelmed and chaos begins to rule within there. And so you could say also here, for the meditator, the goal here is when the breath is restless, it's like a veil, and that veil of the breath hides the inner light. The veil of the breath hides the inner sounds. The veil of the breath hides all deep perceptions. And so the necessity to be able to calm that breath, to be able to control that breath, and ultimately when we learn to be able to withdraw that breath. And so Patanjali speaks of this, and I'll read here. 49. Okay. The next stage in meditation is after asana is to calm the flow of the inner life force. The prana, you could say the movement of prana. Now, the life force, Swami uses life force more than he uses breath here. Most people think of it as calming the breath, but it's really the calming of the life force. The emphasis while breathing may be more on inhalation, on exhalation, or on stillness, and may be on space, entering the body, on the timing of the inhalation and the exhalation, and on the number of counts in each inflow and outflow, whether the flow be short or long. And there is a fourth kind of pranayama, which occurs during breathlessness, when one ceases to be aware of the outer world and the body. In consequence, the veil hiding the inner light is removed. Then the mind becomes fit for true concentration. Now this, to a beginning student who's not familiar with yoga, says, oh yes, what's the goal of these breathing exercises? Well, to go into a state of breathlessness. They might say, well, what? I don't want to do that, because it's obviously something not current in society's thinking to be able to do that. And why in the world do we want to do that even? Well, it has its health benefits, of course. The breathing suspends, the heart begins to slow down. It's very calming, very centering, but it's the ability to transcend that association. It's the breath is said in yoga to be the cord that ties the soul to the body. And when we learn to cut that cord, we find that we can be able to live without the breath. Now, this is a very high state, but we, as Yogananda would say, we learn to transmute the breath. We begin to explode the atoms into energy, and the oxygen atoms into energy, and we begin to learn strictly by energy itself, drawing energy into the body. Man shall not live by bread alone, is what it says in the Bible. And we live by that real bread of life is the life force that enters into the body. And as Yogananda explained very uniquely amongst yogis, he explained is that life force enters into the sixth chakra, the medulla oblongata, and we begin to live directly on that life force. And so consequently, this has been demonstrated in many ways by many people who have given up eating, any outward sustenance, and live directly by that life force. Now, this is a useful tool, not just to be fasting, but to be able to live by life force means that we're able to draw that life force into the body at will. To be able to pull that life force, which is the ingredient for any success in life is to be able to control that life force, not just in the breath, but to be able ultimately in one's daily life, in higher states of meditation, to be able to draw life force and express that life force in outward ways as well. So an extremely important step. But also, it's extremely important to think in terms of this life force and the breath. By suspending that breath, it opens the door for us to enter in to the deeper inner kingdom that is spoken about in all the great scriptures. In the Bible, Christ it speaks of the inner kingdom. And we often wonder, what in the world is that inner kingdom? Well, of course, metaphorically and symbolically, we can think of all the inner kingdom or the inner heaven. But how do we experience that? How do we open the gate? The gate through which we must pass is the gate of, you could say, the gate of the spiritual eye, or being able to enter into the Sushumna, the deep spine, beyond the outward nerve channels that are associated with the breath. When we can neutralize those outer nerve channels, we bring ourselves into the deep inner spine. And this is in the deeper teachings of yoga. This is always what's spoken about. And Swami Sri Yukteswar, in his book, The Holy Science, he refers to the spiritual eye as the Sushumna Dwara, meaning the doorway into the Sushumna, bringing our attention so one-pointedly focused there that we enter into the inner light that is seen at the point between the eyebrows. And also, people, when we speak of it in terms of the Om vibration, in terms of sound, to be able to feel and experience and dive and immerse oneself into that Om vibration. These are all wonderful, lovely ideas, expansive ideas, inspiring ideas. But how do we do it? How do we get there? When we think of, it seems so difficult. How do we pick it up? And I think the essence of that is expressed in Pratyahara, this third, or of today's topics, but the fifth of the limbs of yoga. The senses that keep us restless can be withdrawn through the practice of pranayama, these exercises of learning to control those senses, control the energy behind the senses, control those sense telephones. And then the controlling that is meant to happen is the ability to withdraw away from the outer world where the senses are outwardly looking and expressing, and be able to draw that, interiorize that into the inner spine is what we're speaking about here, into the Sushumna. When we can withdraw into the inner spine, the chitta, the waves, the ups and downs of life are calmed. And it's at that point, for the yogi, for the meditator, it's at that point that true concentration and meditation begin. Now we speak about meditating on day-to-day, learn to meditate, lesson 1, and it's trying to meditate, learning and practicing everything preliminary. But true meditation is when the mind is totally calm, take that back. When the mind is truly interiorized in a state of pratyahara, because even then it's not totally calm, because we have more work to do even at that point. But nevertheless, we've reached that state of dropping the outer body and entering into the deeper spine to be able to one-pointedly concentrate, which is what we're going to discuss next week. And so this is our chore, and you can, when you start thinking about these things deeply, you realize that, as we said right at the beginning, no perfection in any one of these is able unless we perfect all of them. So you could say pranayam and pratyahara, where does one begin? And you could say pranayam is the attempting and the doing those things that help us interiorize, whereas pratyahara is actually that process, that actual interiorization. And you could say they go hand in hand, and both require concentration. But true concentration upon God only begins, you could say, once we attempt it. But the ability to do it happens only once we're interiorized. But this is all seeming very confusing. How do we achieve this for the average person? How do you pick it up? We can talk about it. And I think this, for me, was the beauty and has been the beauty and the blessing of the practice of Kriya Yoga. Because this is where Kriya Yoga comes into picture. It gives us something to grab onto. It's not, how do you grab onto pranayama, controlling the life force? What do you do? How do you grab onto interiorization? Pratyahara. How do you do pratyahara? Is there a practice for it? Well, yes, there is. And this is what Kriya Yoga is about. It's the practice of magnetizing the spine in such a way that we don't have to push or pull or think or stress, but by developing magnetism in the spine, it has a natural effect of pratyahara. It withdraws, it pulls that life force in. Now we need to control all this, yes, but if we can focus one-pointedly on a specific technique that will accomplish all this, we'll find that the result of this, the daily practice, of course with concentration, daily practice with using our willpower and using our devotion, coupling that with the breath, we find that we can, over time, begin this process of pratyahara. And all of us have these ingredients within us. We all have willpower. It's not perfected, and we haven't harnessed it. It's here and there and scattered, but we have it. I think we all know that. We all have a little bit of power to concentrate, keep ourselves one-minded, keep ourselves attentive. If you like to read a book, and you literally like that book, you concentrate upon it. Anything you do outwardly, if you can concentrate to some degree. Well, we harness that with willpower, and we add the element of devotional intent, devotion and concentrating intently in a specific way, and we couple it with our breath, and we have it with us right there. And this is the beauty of why Kriya Yoga has been brought into the world today for this age of Dwapara Yuga, this age of energy, this age where the realization that matter is not the ultimate reality. There's something beyond that. It's not just energy that's beyond that, but for the common man, for common discourse, it's one step closer to where we're ultimately going. And so to be able to do something that will increase our magnetism, and this is, you could say, we're using pranayama to increase magnetism. Now, interestingly, Swami Kriyananda, again, referring back to the holy science, he speaks the age we're in now, we're in an age of energy. We're in an age of being aware of energy. From awareness will eventually come control. And from the control of that energy will come a full realization of the powers of magnetism. But interestingly, I always found it quite amusing. He described some of the qualities of this age of energy, expansive, being able to enter into the inner kingdom. Generally, people will learn to do that. Space will be annihilated in the sense of as the passage of this yuga. But then he goes on and mentioned this age of magnetism. And he says, I'm not going to buy, I'm paraphrasing here because I don't remember the exact quote, but I can't describe the qualities of the age of magnetism because you won't understand it. People do not have the capacity, of mental capacity, to even understand what I'm speaking of. So he leaves it at that. But that's what we're going to. Now, we have to be able to create magnetism within us. There's a positive side to do. We have to do something. And that's develop our energy, develop our concentration, develop our aspiration, develop our devotion. And there's a negative side. I don't mean it in a negative, bad way, but I says we have to be able to control those tendencies, remove the blockages, remove the negative aspects, control the things that dissipate our magnetism, or in our case, dissipate our energy, dissipate our ability to relax. Those things that have the effect, those blockages that cause ego consciousness, all those things, we have to remove those things. But taking it from the position that our natural state is in to be a state of ease. Swami Satchidananda, a great yogi that I had met many times earlier in my life, he loved to play on the word of ease versus dis-ease. We live in a world of disease, dis-ease. He says we're diseased. And until we learn to remove those things that are causing disease, we will not be able to return to our natural state of ease. The pull of the body, the pull of the ego, the pull of personality, identification, all of those things are pulling us out of our state. So what we need to do is find something that encapsulates all of these concepts, because we're natural questions. So I'd love to do that. How do I do that? And this was my journey when I came to the study of spirituality in general. Before I read the autobiography of Yogi and met these teachings, I was saying, this is all great. I love it. I want to do this. I agree. You know, my goal. What do I do? What do I do? And that was always behind there. It was so confusing to me. And I read many different books, followed different pathways. But it was still, I couldn't get a handle on it until I read that book, Autobiography of a Yogi, and I came across his description of Kriya Yoga. And he said, this, you don't have to believe what I'm saying. And I'm paraphrasing here. You don't have to believe what I'm saying. All of these miracles here, maybe they happened, maybe they didn't happen. That was, my mind was running through these concepts. But he said, try it. Here's something you can do. And if you're dedicated, you will see the results. I don't have to explain it all to you. Just try something. And it encapsulates. And this is what our whole teaching of what we're speaking about here up to this point in the Yoga Sutras. And this is what Swami Sri Yukteswar said is the sadhana. We're completing now sadhana pada. This is the sadhana for the age of Dwapara into which we have now entered. And so keep that in mind. And you'll find you don't have to understand all of this, but you do have to have perseverance. You do have to have faith that, with a positive expectation, you might say. You have to have devotion. And you might say, if you're doubting along the way, I don't understand any of this particularly, but I do know that this will change, and I believe this will change my life. And you will see over the passage of some years, not 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, probably, my master used to say, you won't really find what you're looking for at least 10 years. But he doesn't always say that exactly in the autobiography, but privately he said, you practice and you will see. You may not find your goal ultimately. You may not be able to go through that Shushumna Dwara, but you'll begin to see your life change. Your magnetism will change. And when your magnetism changes, everything changes. And all I can say is try it and see. And so with that, I'm going to leave it this week. And I want to come back, but I do want to come back next week. And we're going to continue then now into the next book, Vibhuti-pada. Now that's an interesting, why did he call it Vibhuti-pada? Well, let's talk about that next week. And Ashish, I want to leave some time here to answer any questions that might have popped up in the chat box. So did any? And I'm going to look myself. I don't see any. But if there are questions, please do submit, and I'll stay for a little bit longer. And then we'll come back next week. And you can always, if you forget to ask now, you can always ask next week too. So anyway.
There are a couple of questions that come directly to me, Jaya. So
Okay. Okay.
one that came in the beginning when you were mentioning about restlessness being a natural tendency for all of us. The question is, why is it a natural tendency for the body to be restless? And are there
Well,
ways of overcoming it?
okay, well, it's natural. It's not necessarily natural for the soul, but you're very correct. It's natural for the body. It's because we've entered, our consciousness has become enmeshed in duality. And when you're enmeshed in duality, what is the characteristic of duality? It's vibration. It's up and it's down. The yes and no, either or, hot and cold. And there's no ability to ever rest at that center point. No, we can. Yogananda used to say everybody, they're either happy, they're sad, they're at that center point temporarily for a moment of peace, but it doesn't last, or they're bored. And he says usually everybody's in one of those states. But now we want to be in that center point at peace. And so we meditate, and we do accomplish that sense of peace for a little while. We're resting right there, relaxing or relaxed. Maybe we're even concentrated. But until the breath itself stops, we're not going to be able to sustain it for long. So it's the very nature of the movement. It's movement, vibration. And so that's the nature of creation, this created world in duality, in Maya. And so it goes hand in hand. Now we want to bring ourselves to that, stop that, and rest. And it can be, and I think all of these, any good practice, healthy diet, healthy living, happy attitudes, they can bring us to a sense of peace for a while. And this is enjoyable, but it doesn't last until we transcend, you see, the very nature of attachment, and we're glued, loosen that glue that binds us to the world of ups and downs. And we're on the wheel of reincarnating again and again and again because of that karmic wheel. And as long as we're on that karmic wheel, you could say there's an element of restlessness. So what to do about it, though? Now that's the big question. I think we all can realize what restlessness is about. Well, again, you have to take it on a step-by-step basis, depending upon where we are. You could say at the root of it, you say, oh yeah, you have to calm the breath and go like Yogananda said, dump the body, go beyond the breath. Well, that's easy to say, but not so easy to do. So you have to start where you are. And I think the thing is to be moving in the right direction. So, if you're sliding downhill, the first thing to do is stop. Stop and turn around, look in a different direction. And just doing that, though, like turning, like the sun's shining and you're wondering, where is it? You turn around, it's back there. Just doing that, you see, you're attracted. You're really never at a point of stillness. You're always being attracted by one direction or another direction. So in which way are you being attracted? And there's millions of things that's simultaneously pulling us, but where is the general pull and which way are you going? And I think that's the thing. Get going in the right direction, and by itself, not talking about any techniques or anything, by itself, aspire upward rather than just relax downward down the slope. That's the first thing. That's what the yamas and niyamas start us off with. He says, first you have to get yourself stopped, from going to that way and start looking at a better way. Then you start looking, and I think it comes to the heart. You start to look for answers. And when you start looking for answers, you could say, awaken, as Yogananda used to say, soldiers of past good habits from previous lifetimes will awaken and come to your aid. It's not like you have to do it all, but you do have to wake up a little bit and start going in the good direction. You start attracting help. You see, and that's an amazing thing. When you're going in a better direction, I'm doing my best, the world starts to support you in whatever. Now, you could say going downhill, that the world supports you in that. All of a sudden, you find all sorts of things to help you slide down that hill. But it's the same thing going upward. And I think that's the first thing. Then you start applying. And you start applying to try this, try that. I tried all sorts of different things, techniques of meditating, looking at a point on a wall, and an exercise, and all, and just also visualizations, all good. But it was hard to get that restless mind to stop. And it was, like I say, the breakthrough came for me when I found something I really wanted. And that was, I wanted Kriya Yoga. I found Master's Path, and I wanted to dive deeply into it because it awakened my heart. And I really wanted, and it's that wanting that attracted me, I don't know, to other people. And I found when I was around other people rather than my old friends, I found I started to be able to meditate a lot better. And then you find you build magnetism, and you find the environment starts to be attracted to you, to be supportive. And then you start to look at your technique, and I found I could relax a little bit better. So from 5 minutes of torture, it extended to 20 to 30 minutes of semi-relaxed. And that was a big improvement. And then from there, you just build on it. And then I learned Kriya. I put myself in association with other people. I learned Kriya, and that gave me a handle. Okay, and then it deepened my devotion, deepened my concentration. And then it was a matter of applying myself, and then keeping those movement or that aspiration high. So it's a step-by-step process. Don't get discouraged, that's the thing. Don't get discouraged. You just got to keep moving forward. And you fall and you get up again. Now, what else are you going to do? You don't have it. It's sort of, we're stuck here. And so you can either sit there and go in one direction, or you say, I'm going to do something, and I'm going to keep getting up and go in that direction. So what else is there really when you bring it down to the very basic essentials? Do you even have a choice? I think that's a now philosophical question, because your suffering will drive you to finding an answer. But why wait for suffering? I mean, really, why wait to find yourself in a mess? Anticipate it and get a glimpse of it and say, oh, I don't think so. I'm going to go that way. And so it's inevitable for all of us have to sooner or later find our way back home. You can take the long road or a little bit shorter route. It's up to us. It's up to us. Or we can suffer, Anyway, that's I'm drifting into philosophy here. What was the other question?
Thank you, Jaya. I have two more questions, but we're running out of time.
I know I'm running out of time, and I'm going to be short. I'm going to be short on this one.
This is a question regarding this. So if you have managed to still the body, I think it came from the time when you said 3 hours of sitting still.
Yeah.
The person is asking, once that is done, does pranayam and pratyahara happen naturally, or do we have to still do something else?
Well, no, basically it's the ability to sit still. You see it, not the fact of sitting still. It's the ability to sit still for at least that amount of time. It's said to be, because yogis are always asked the question, what's the measure? And the traditional answer is the ability to sit still for 3 hours is a measure that you have attained an ability to control asana to some degree. Now, of course, that doesn't mean something happens at 3 hours, but it gives you a chance, you might say. And look, it doesn't necessarily take 3 hours to be able to have an ecstatic experience, but it's just that particular, to be focused on that. But then it begins to happen very naturally when we can stay still with concentration, devotion, or willpower, one-pointed focus, the life force begins to withdraw. Yogananda used to say, he would tell us when doing Kriya practice, a full set of Kriya is 108 Kriyas. But then to his more advanced disciples, he says, oh, Dr. Lewis, you only, or Rajasi, he only needs to do 1 or 2 Kriyas, and then he's in a state of interiorization. Because he was just like, he's out acting and doing, says, okay, let's meditate. And he would just control that life force movement in his spine with, you remember, a lot of energy here, and concentrate. He'd do that a few times and he'd pull that life force in. You see, it was under his control. And that's where we want to, that part of it is hard. Or probably, hard's not the right word, but it takes some time and practice. So it happens but we give ourselves a chance if we're still. You see, if we're not still, we're fighting against it. And so we have to get to the point where we're not fighting the body. It's cooperating. Remember that word, the Patanjali, ease. It gets to a point of ease, and that's what we want. And that can happen very quickly. So don't, whereas I think if you start thinking 3 hours and you're watching that clock, there's probably a little residual mental tension there. You want to forget the clock. That's what we want to do. Forget the clock. Okay, what was the next question?
The last question for today is, how do we know when we have entered the Sushumna? When we are completely there, will we still be aware of the body and the world outside?
Okay, now that's a very complicated question. Now I think in the sense, it's like intuition. How do you know something? How do you know anything? You experience something. But the other, I think let's back it up a little bit. Because where do you totally know? Is there gradations of these things, et cetera, et cetera? That gets a very, very subtle. Let's back it up. Do you see the spiritual eye? Do you see the spiritual eye? Can you enter into the light of the spiritual eye? Now, there are different rings. I don't know if we have gone into this or not over these weeks, but the rings of the spiritual eye, the yellow and the blue and the white. Can you enter in? Can you see that? Can you see, or if you don't see that, can you see, let's say, because sometimes to see it very clearly is you might say that's either an act of grace, given to you as a temporary inspiration, but to be able to recall it at will, sometimes maybe you only see the gold, that gold ring. To be able to see that clearly and to be able to enter into that light, or to enter into that blue light, or even in the white star. But in order to enter into that, you have to see it first, right? It has to appear there. And so consequently, and when you start to see that light, and hear the sounds also, the sound, the Om, you begin to be so absorbed in that, you start to enter into that, and it's an indicator that you have withdrawn the life force away from the senses, and you're entering in. Now, you haven't necessarily gone into a state of samadhi at that point, because there's still this ego sense of I am entering, I am doing this, you see, I am. And but you've got to the point where you've been able to drop the body. Now, there are all sorts of variations on this, but you basically forget the body. And this is what Yogananda said, dump the body. And now, here's an interesting thing I've noticed. Excuse me. You may have found this to be true. Sometimes you're meditating, and I would say this, and you're meditating and you can look down, you can see your body there, and maybe your hands are here resting on the legs here, and you can't feel it. You can't feel your body. And you look at it, it's like somebody else, it's like dead weight. It's like you're just looking at it, and you can't feel the legs or nothing. You just, whose body is, you're just sort of looking at it. Now, that's an interesting experience, but that definitely shows that you're withdrawing, you see, from the tactile sensation. And you may not yet have withdrawn your life force inwardly yet, but you've gotten to the point of so relaxed. Now that's a good sign because it gives you a platform to be able to then to interior, go beyond the disturbance of the body, and then you can jump to the next step of focusing. And if you have that experience, feel the devotion and look into the spiritual eye and direct your devotional heart's energy up to the spiritual eye, because then you've got a chance to not be disturbed by that body, and it shows an indicator that you're going up beyond it. So that's another thing I would watch for.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll be back next week. Now we're going to enter into the next chapter, next book here, Vibhuti Pada. And I've been thinking about that word Vibhuti. Why did he use that? And let's explore that. Okay, see you next week.
Thank you.
Om Guru.